What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Cutting Edge Garage. Today we're going to be taking a look at this 2011 Honda Accord. We're actually doing a wheel bearing in it, and this vehicle doesn't have a hub assembly like a lot of other vehicles, so we actually got to press in this wheel bearing right here, take some stuff loose, get the knuckle loose, and we're actually going to be using a hub grappler kit from OTC. That'll help us do it in the car without having to take the whole knuckle out and then press it out with the shop press. So you guys stick around, I'll show you step by step. Alright, so first thing we got to do, now that we got the vehicle up in the air where it's easier to work on, we got to get that wheel off. So I'm going to be using a 19mm socket. I got this nice non-marring socket from SP Tools, and we're also going to need the wheel nut lock. And these are usually located either in the glove box or in the trunk by the spare tire, or sometimes they'll be in the center console. So let's snatch this wheel off and we'll go from there. Alright, so our next step is we got to get some of this brake hardware out of the way. So first thing, we need to get the caliper. So I'm just going to twist this to the right, and that'll give me access to the two caliper bracket bolts. Now you don't need to take these two bolts loose that hold the caliper onto the caliper bracket. We can just take the caliper bracket loose and take it all out as one assembly, and then we're going to use some of this tie-down wire, and we're just going to hang it up out of our way. And that's important. You don't want to just let the caliper hang down on the brake hose. You can actually damage the brake hose that way. All right, so I'm going to take my 12mm ratchet wrench, go ahead and bust this brake line hose mount loose. There we go. All right, now for this next step, to get caliper brackets off, you're just going to need a 17mm socket, and usually some kind of impact to make it easiest on it. There we go. Why is it so loud? It's just got power. Alright, so now I'm going to use my tie-down wire. I'm just going to hang it up on this bracket where the brake line mounts in. It's welded to the frame, so it's going to be plenty strong. Whole caliper should just slide off like that. Now, I just got to thread this through anywhere that looks sturdy, really. 2 or 3 should be plenty. Alright, that's out of the way. So now, I'm going to turn this back front. Alright, to get this rotor off, normally there's 2 Phillips head screws in here, but one's come off, and to be honest, they're not hugely important. They're just there for vehicle assembly by the manufacturer. So let's go ahead and bust this one loose, and I got a special tool for doing these because a lot of times they're froze up. Alright, so this is just called an impact driver. And it kind of does the same thing as an impact wrench. But basically what it is, you can put the Phillips head in your fastener, and you just pop the end with a hammer, and it'll twist that fastener off. And you just want to make sure that when you're pushing in on it that it's loosening. It actually looks like it's tightening. There we go. So yeah, pushing in is trying to twist to the left. Alright, so we just take it, put it in our fastener nice and firm. We just need to pop the end good and hard with a hammer. That's all there is to it, and that's a lot better than fighting it with a regular Phillips head and potentially stripping it out. Then you've made another set of work for yourself. So now, the rotor should be ready to come on off. Alright, so our next steps. We got to get at least the bottom part of this knuckle loose so we can get the CV shaft out, and then we can get our bearing press tool attached to the knuckle, and then we can start pulling the hub out, and then we can pull the bearing out, clean it up, and then we can get our new bearing in. So let's get the right tools we need to get this tie rod end and the lower ball joint. That's the 2 we got to get loose, and this whole assembly will kind of swing out free. And then we'll take our end nut loose of our CV shaft, we'll pop the end of the CV shaft through, pull it over out of the way, and then we should be ready to start pulling the hub out. Alright, so this is our tie rod end where it mounts to the knuckle. You see it's got this pin going to the bottom that keeps the nut from falling off. That's just called a cotter pin. So the way I take these off, so I'll take a pair of side cutters. We're not going to cut it, we're just going to bend them back kind of halfway straight. Like so. Use your finger some. Here we go. And then you can use the cutters to grip, not cut, the other side. And we're just going to pull it on through. Kind of using it like a lever. Almost. There we go. That's our cotter pin out. We'll straighten that out later. And I'll go ahead, and you're going to have the same deal on the ball joint. So the ball joint's going to have what they call a castellated nut. It's got slots cut in the nut. I'll show you guys here in a second. Basically that keeps this nut from backing off at all. The one on that tie rod end just keeps it from falling off the vehicle. That's our second cotter pin out. Alright, now we just need to take our impact. Alright, so now I'm just going to take our little impact in a 19mm socket, and these should come right off. Yep, zipped it right off. Same 19mm for the bottom ball joint. Zipped it right off. And it's worth noting that you want to keep all your fasteners organized. So I got my grip mat, my roll around card here, and I put all my fasteners from left to right as I take them off. So that way when I go to reassemble everything, that I just go from right to left, and I'm not hunting for any fasteners and wasting time. Alright, so our next step is going to be to get the tie rod end and the ball joint loose. And we're going to have to actually go to our first specialty tool of the video. That's called a, well, I call them a pickle fork, but they're called a tie rod or a ball joint separator. So let me go grab that. Okay. Alright, and I've got a pretty nice set from SP Tools. It has several different ends on it for different size ball joints and tie rod ends. So I think I'll need, yes, this one. And these are pretty simple. They just screw right on the end. Alright, we want to try to kind of work this under the boot. We do our best not to damage the boot, but a lot of times you will using the pickle fork. So I'm just going to give this. Alright, so let's tap it in until it wedges, and then I should just be able to pop it a couple times. It should come on out. There you go. Alright, so that's our tie rod out of the way. Looks like, yeah, the boot's just fine. It's not torn. We just squeeze some grease out of it. Try to work some grease back in there when we're done. So now, you got to do the same thing to the lower ball joint. Looks like we'll need the next size up in our pickle fork kit. Pop it a few times. Ooh, she's tight. You know what that means? Need a bigger hammer. There you go. Alright, so now we got the lower ball joint loose, we can just pick up the whole knuckle just like that. And now it's out of the ball joint, so our next step is we got to get a big socket. And then we got to take this nut loose, then we'll pop the end of the CV joint through. And that way this whole knuckle will be loose and we can maneuver it around and get our ball joint press tool on it. Alright, so for this nut we're going to need a 36mm socket. Whoop, that zipped it right off. There's a couple different ways you can do this. You can take like a, not a center punch, but it's a regular punch, and tap it in the middle. I like to get like a soft hammer, something like aluminum or brass, then I can wail on the end without having to, you know what, instead of doing that, let's screw this nut back on. That'll protect your threads. So I've got a dead blow hammer here from SP Tools, and it's got a brass end and an aluminum end. And that says I don't want to mar up the fastener or the end of the shaft. So just going to wail on this a little bit. I already felt that come loose. So we can go ahead and get our nut out of the way. See, yep, came right out once we got it loose. Alright, now our CV axle's out of the way. Now you can see I can just take this knuckle and I can move it, turn it wherever I want. So our next step in this process is we got to use our hub press tool from OTC to go ahead and pull this hub out. That'll expose the bearing, and then we got to pull the bearing out. And what we got here is a hub grappler kit from OTC, and basically we use all these different attachments along with the this jack screw. So first we're going to use this big kind of C-clamp looking thing, and these slide in and out to match whatever vehicle you're working on. They got little set screws on the back, so once you get them where you like them, you can lock them down. But basically this goes in, put our screw through the shaft, and this will go to the back side of the hub. And then we've got to put, it will probably be this attachment right here, I'll have to see. Then when you screw your nut on the other side, and then all you do is take your impact, or a big long handled wrench, and you'll tighten it here while holding the screw on the back, and that's going to draw that hub out. So let's get all this on the vehicle and get that hub pulled out. All right, something I like to do, this backing plate, you don't want to bend it. And there's actually 3 screws that hold it on. There's one up top and one down bottom here. I like to get those out of the way because that's where the feet from that clamp that we're going to use to draw the hub out are going to want to sit, and those screws just get in the way. So you can't really get a screwdriver in there because the hub's in the way, but you can usually. Broke that one loose. Helps when using the right way. That one's loose. I should be able to run them out by hand now. Alright, and it's really important. Here, I'll pull this off and show you guys. This right here, this is where all the force is going to end up. So this has got to be sitting against something really solid. So make sure you got this backing plate here. If you're, well, you can't take it off out of your way. You got to be sure you're pressing to get something solid behind it, like the knuckle. If you catch it somewhere like over here where the knuckle's not back there, then you're just going to bend the backing plate, and then you've created more work for yourself. So make sure those ears are somewhere really solid. Bring them all the way in here. All right, so I think I got the bottom about where I want it. So I'm going to tighten down this screw. Let's see if I can get the top about where I want it. Tighten down my top screw. Easy now. That looks all right. Now, all right, so you got to make sure that the attachment you're using to pull the hub out only hits the hub, or the back of the hub. I don't know if I can turn it this far enough to show you guys. All right, so you can see I'm turning the hub with my hand. We only want to grab this center part. You can see this line here. This is the bearing out here, and this is the back side of the hub. So we want to make sure. Let me reposition here. When you slide that on, see we're not grabbing the bearing too, because you're probably not going to be able to pull it all out at once, and you kind of don't want to, because then you have to press it all apart like on the workbench or using a vise, and that's just more of a pain. So we're going to let the tool do the work. Grab me nut. Ooh, something you want to do. So I'm going to take a little bit of oil from Ollie oil can here. Alright, so we're ready to put our impact on this and draw it out, but it is worth noting that you want to wear safety glasses when you're doing something like this. Even though my regular glasses probably not going to stop a piece of metal if this thing breaks. Even Bill behind the camera, I've got him wearing safety glasses too, so we're good and safe. But we will need an 1.25" wrench. You can use a crescent wrench probably just to hold that on, but I always like using the proper size wrench, plus it's big and shiny. And we're going to hit the outside with a 1-inch socket on the impact. Make sure we're going the right way here. We're not. Huh, good thing I checked. Alright, so we're going to hold that. And now we should just be able to put the screws to it, so to speak. And it should draw that hub on out if we're lucky. Make sure we're still, yeah, we're good in the back. There you go. Our hub came on out, and the inner race is going to come out with it as well. And that's nothing to worry about, just as the way it does. We're going to have to get that off later when we go to reinstall everything. So, get this all. Yeah! And our tool comes on out. And you see, this is what we were drawing out. This is the hub. That's what your wheel actually bolts to. And like I said, we got to get this inner race off. Our next step here is going to be, we got to get the rest of the bearing itself out. So we got to go in there, we got to find the right adapter that fits the back side of that bearing, and then we got to pull it on out. Alright, so we got to do a couple things here before we start to draw the bearing out. First, we got to get this big circlip out on the face of the knuckle, and then there's an ABS speed sensor or wheel speed sensor back there we got to get loosened out of the way so we don't damage it. So these are pretty easy. You want to make sure that it's the right size too. So if you're using a too small one, you might break it or you're going to be fighting it. So squeeze it, pull it on out. Yep, that's our big circlip out of the way. And now here on the back side, yeah, we can see this wheel speed sensor. So we got, looks like a 10 millimeter, two 10 millimeter bolts, one for the bracket and one for the sensor itself. We'll get those loose. All right, got our two 10 millimeter bolts out. Should be able to work this sensor on out. There we go. So let's put that back out of the way. Now one more thing, we got a, it's kind of like a dust shield here on the back. We got to just pull this on out. You can use like a bearing snatcher for this, or I'm gonna try to use a lady foot. All right, this is the lady foot. They can come in real handy. See, you've got this curved edge, gives you a ton of leverage with the big long handle, but it's really good for getting in tight places. Ooh. There, she's coming on out. There we go. That's our dust shield taken care of. All right, now we got to size this up. We got to get the right adapter to fit in here on this bearing. And you see there's a big lip in here where the back of the bearing seats against, so we can't go all the way to the outer race. That really doesn't matter. You can grab it on the inner race and just snatch the whole thing out and we should be fine. Perfect! So a couple pieces in the kit we got this big kind of circular cylindrical piece and then the backing plate for it. So what we can actually do is we can just put this here, and then we can just use that screw to go through all the way to the back to our adapter on the back, and then just draw it on out. Oop, oop, oop. Alright, so got my impact on. Now we should be able to just hammer it and draw this on out. And remember to put your safety glasses back on. All right, this is our old bearing. Yeah, the inner bearing definitely feels a little rough, so that's definitely where our roar was coming from. All right, so now we got to clean the housing up, and then we should be ready to go ahead and press our new bearing in. All right, so now I'm just cleaning up the bearing housing here in the knuckle. When we drive the new one in, we don't want there to be any dirt, pieces of metal, anything like that. So right now I'm hitting them with the rag. Then I'm going to use just a whiff of brake clean on a rag. We want to get everything nice and clean as we can because we want to make it as easy on ourselves as we can to get that new bearing in. Alright, so I've got just a little bit of anti-seize here, and it doesn't take much. I'm just going to daub a little bit in there, and we just need a real light coating of it. I'm just going to kind of rub it in with my finger. Alright, so we got some anti-seize on our knuckle in there where our bearing sets, and let's take a look at our bearing. Get a shot of this, Bill. This actually has some of the ABS hardware, like the reluctor ring, made into it. You see these two sides look different. This side kind of looks like a normal bearing seal, but this side looks a little bit different. And that's because this is what that ABS speed sensor we pulled out earlier, this is what it reads on. And this needs to go toward the inside. So it needs to go in like this, with that facing towards the back. And if you don't know which one's what, you can just take any kind of piece of metal, and this is actually magnetic. That's sticking on this side, no sticky on that side. So this side, we know, needs to go in first. So it's going to be the same story as pulling it out. We gotta make sure when we put this one in that our adapter fits. We want it to hit on the outer race, so it's got to be pretty perfectly sized. So we don't want to be pulling on the inner race, because then we may end up damaging the bearing or pulling the inner races through. We want to pull all the force on this outside race if we can. And of course, we want to make sure it goes in straight. Grab my brass hammer, and I'm just going to give it a little tappy tap, just to kind of hold it in place. Alright, when we're putting the inside on, we want to make sure we're pulling against the knuckle and not the bearing. Let's see if this one, that one should work just well. All right, so I went ahead and I just started the bearing nice and straight with the hammer. And I'm taking this adapter, and it should fit, see how it fits nice and snug around the outer race, but this little shoulder fits in the inner race too, so that keeps it from like wobbling off to one side. So that one should fit just fine. Go ahead and stick that part through here. All right, now it's the same story. We're just going to take a wrench on the nut, impact on the outside bolt head, and we should be able to draw it on in. And you'll know when it hits home, you'll hear the tone of the impact change.
How does it go? It'll go from and then go.
I'll point it out. Safety glasses, Bill.
Oh yeah.
Have a look. I think we're good. Light. Well, you can hear the tone change, and you can just see the impact slow down. All right, yep, looks like our groove is exposed all the way around. So yep, we're good. We can go ahead and throw our all right, we can go ahead and put our C-clip back in. The next, we should be ready to pull we got to pull the hub on as well, but remember we got that inner race on there, so all right, what you can do with these, it's not quite all the way seated in, so what I'm going to do is get a little screwdriver, do a little tap and tap, and we're good. Our new bearing is in. Alright, so we got our hub here, and before we put this on the vehicle, it's kind of our last big step, we got to get this inner race off. If you guys can see, there's a little shoulder right here. That's where the end of the race is. And ideally, you'd be able to take this tool that comes in the kit, and that's what it's for. You'd grab the underside of that race, and then you put your plate on top here, and then it's tightened. But it looks like that shoulder is just not going to be big enough for these teeth to grab. So there's a few different ways we can do this. I can try to use the side cutters, or not side cutters, the die grinder to cut little slots here in the sides on each side to give me some meat to grab onto to try to use that tool to pull it off. Or we can take the die grinder and cut like a diagonal line here and try to cut the bearing off. I'm going to try pulling it off first so we don't have to worry about damaging the hub, and that can take a little bit less time overall. So let's give that a shot. Alright, with a little finagling we were able to get it off there, so all we gotta do is make sure this is good and clean, the metal's not marred up or galled up at all, and we can go ahead and press it into our bearing. We can get this vehicle back together. Alright, looks like we're good to go. Our hub hit home, flush up on the back, so now we just need to put our little dust shield back on, and then put all the other bits and bobs back on, and things should be ready to go back on down the road. It's home. All right, we're making good progress now. I seem to have cut myself. Yeah, it is. It looks all stupid, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to slip my tie rod in. start my nut. Same for the ball joint nut. There we go. I'm gonna go ahead and take my 19mm, tighten both these up. Perfect. One end will be longer than the other. Take it. Tappy tap. Then we'll put our CV axle nut on. Then this. Yep, perfect. And just because I have it handy, I'll go ahead and put this nut back in here with my impact driver. Alright, now we can do our CV axle nut. Alright, now when you put these CV axle nuts on, we need to pin this down in there. You guys can see there's a little groove cut in the end of the CV axle shaft. So what we're going to do, we're going to pin this nut over into it, and that's what keeps it from backing off. So I'm going to go find this chisel punch, and I'm going to punch that down to where it holds that nut. Alright, so I intentionally grabbed one of my punches that are a little bit dull, because I don't want to cut it. I just want to punch this down to where it's retained on the end of that axle shaft. Alright, you guys can see where I pinned it in right there. Now this nut can't turn and it can't back off. So we're good there. Now we can go ahead and get our caliper bracket. Our caliper assembly, I should say. And you can just cut this, but I like to save it, so I'm going to untwist it. Righty. This should, and it's worth noting, you want to make sure that your caliper line's not twisted. See, it's got a little curlicue in it. So I think, is it twisted? No. No, that's right. You just want to make sure when this your brake line's not twisted when you put this all back together. So this should slip right back onto our rotor. There we go. And our bolt holes lining up nicely for our brake line. That should be good. So I'll take my caliper bracket bolts. Line the hole up. Give it a little jiggle. Come on, there we go, that started. I'll take my 17mm socket on the impact. Tighten those up good. And I always like to go back and check my caliper bracket bolts by hand, because it's an awful important piece. So you don't want to just hit it with the impact and call it good. So let's torque it down. Alright, so now it's got a 17mm on my breaker bar. And then I'm just going to make sure these are nice and tight. Oh wow, that 3/8 impact did a good job getting them tight. Alright, those are good and tight. Now we just got our brake line hold down bracket, which is kind of a pain. Gotta put it in from this side. Good and snug. Alright, I think that about does it, guys. We just got, and of course, when it's all back together, turn it. You gotta make sure you didn't bend that backing plate and it's not dragging against the rotor. It's not the end of the world if that does happen. You may have to take it apart and kind of bend it back into shape. Everything looks good and feels good. We'll do one last check. That's tight. Did those two. Caliper bracket bolts are tight. We did our CV nut shaft. We got collar pins and tight nuts on our tie rod end and ball joint. So let's slap the wheel on this thing and we'll take it for a test drive. Alright, so let's throw our wheel back up. There we go. Go ahead and start one of these bottom nuts, and I'll run this one up flush, and that way it'll hold it flush up against the hub, and then I can go ahead and get all my other nuts started. Alright, the last thing I like to do before I let it down, just as a courtesy, I'm going to go ahead and check all the tire pressures. It's easy because they're all at chest height. This vehicle calls for a 32 psi. We're at 30 and a half, so yeah, we need a little bit. Yep, 32 on the money. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and repeat on all 4 wheels. Then we'll drop it down, and then I'm gonna use an actual torque wrench to torque this wheel down. And then we should be ready for a drive. Okay, so I test drove the vehicle. It drives nice and smooth and quiet now, no more bearing noise. This job can definitely be more of a pain than just doing like a regular hub assembly, but a good tech should be able to do this in about an hour after they get accustomed to using these tools. If you want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe and hit that bell notification if you want to get notified every time we upload a new video. If you're interested in any of the tools you saw here today, please head on over to sptoolsusa.com. You can see anything and everything we got over there. I'm Jacob, and thanks for watching.